to Ruth.
Thank you. Carolyn, you've mentioned that fixed fees has saved money, but with that and the refusal to make staged payments has caused some problems. It could mean that lawyers cherry-pick cases in the future with taking on the most complex or the most simple, and those in the middle not getting access to legal representation. How will you improve that situation for the future?
Oh, I think I'll have to pass that one to Ruth. Sorry, Linda.
We're obviously alive to the problem of cherry picking with any fixed fee system, but we were very clear with providers and the representative bodies in development of the scheme that really providers had to look at the whole amount of the work, the caseload they did, rather than individual cases, and consider the compensation, if you like, the money on that whole volume of work. We also, in our contracts, which as we've heard are full, have quite a lot of provisions in them intended to safeguard against cherry picking. And what we do in order to enforce that is we'll look at a sample of claims, particularly if we have some concerns, when we look at the actual costs reported against the fixed fees that we pay. And we'll have a look and see what's going on the ground. And if there are concerns, then we would take action, which could ultimately lead to termination of the contract. Although, when we did a review of fixed fees, having first introduced them back in 2007, we found in the early stages that really those concerns were pretty much misplaced. And generally, through provider education and representative body education, we've been able to guard against that, and certainly not really familiar of any particular problems to date with people being turned away.
Right. So you're saying that people that need legal aid can access it?
Well, obviously in any cash limited system,
I'm more concerned about the people missing out on legal advice.
Yes, I mean, to the extent that we are funded to be able to provide it, because civil legal aid in England and Wales is subject to the money being made available, as opposed to crime, which obviously there are wider considerations for funding appropriate defendants in that case. So within the amount of the resource we have, we do our utmost to ensure that there is maximum access. And in fact, as our report shows today, that we've been driving up the numbers of people helped consistently year on year, whilst maintaining the budget, and fixed fees are the mechanism that's enabled us to do that.
Okay, thanks. Carolyn, again, you've described your relationship with the legal service providers as adversarial. How are you working to create a more constructive relationship between the two of you?
I think I said that before the judicial review by the Law Society. So, and I was certainly trying very hard, personally and organisationally, to work cooperatively and collegiately with representative bodies. And I think largely we do have positive relationships with representative bodies. However, it is no secret that our relationship with the Law Society in particular is adversarial and indeed is litigious. We are in a process of mediation, which has been instigated by the Legal Aid Practitioners Group, and we are looking forward to our next session, which is next Tuesday, and we are very committed, as I believe the Law Society are as well, to working through the difficulties in the relationship that we've had. Their chief executive will be present, I will be present, Bill will be present, Ruth will be present, other chairs and chief executives of representative bodies will be present. So I think there is a real will to try to overcome some of the difficulties that we have undoubtedly had.
And there is also a difference between our relationship with the representative body or the provider in an adversarial context, perhaps publicly, and our private relationship. And in actual fact, generally speaking, our private relationship with providers is very constructive. Yeah. They often speak particularly highly of their relationship managers. It's just obviously when we are in an environment of decreasing funding, there is a tension, and that tension will show itself publicly, I think. But privately, relations are much better.
This tension existed before.
Of course, it's inevitable.
And overpayments have been mentioned before, Ruth. When's that programme of recuperating those overpayments going to be complete? And is the data that you've got, do you think, reliable?
I think the data we've got is, well, there's various data, but in terms of the data that we hold about the overpayments that have been made and therefore the recovery that we're trying to undertake is reliable. And in terms of the figures that are quoted in terms of the level of overpayments, I think it's really important to understand that that is an estimated or an extrapolated figure, and that is done from sampling that we undertake and the NAO verify. And so, for example, the figures that are quoted today and laid before Parliament of near enough £80 million worth of errors, the actual errors that were found amounted to £48,000. So it is a figure that is then extrapolated. We have undertaken a lot of work to try to recover those monies. Our target for this financial year to recover monies is £11 million, and we are on target to recover that money. And I have to say that in the majority of instances in working with providers, I attended a session very recently with providers where we were undertaking the stewardship work, and where errors are found, which I think in most instances are absolutely genuine because of the complexity. There is no question about those providers being very willing to repay monies to us. So obviously every process we have at the Legal Services Commission has an appeal attached to it, so we have to go through appeals to any recoveries that we make, but then we will achieve our £11 million recovery this year. Some of the recoveries go back a significant time, and the Parliamentary Ombudsman is now just formally told us today that she will be investigating 2 recoveries, I think, that go back to 2006.
Is there a parallel underpayment problem which, if extrapolated it, would produce a large figure?
Yeah, the underpayments was about £2.1 million last year. Most of those underpayments really relate to eligibility to clients who weren't eligible anyway, so we don't actually have to pay the money back. So the claims were wrong, the clients weren't eligible. I mean, the whole system really does throw up some anomalies. The testing that we're doing in this financial year, because we have put a huge amount of controls in place to try to eradicate the errors before they start, which is what we really need to do, is prevent rather than cure. And the work that we're doing at the moment shows, in one of our categories, shows that actually we've got an underspend because of the level of underpayment extrapolated comes out with a completely ridiculous figure. So I'm sure that won't be the final figure at the end of this year. But it does, the extrapolation process, it depends on which files you pull out, and it depends on what the value of that individual file is, what kind of case it is, which then extrapolates to a figure. So it is an estimated figure, but I mean, and it's 80 million around about this year. But there's no question it's much bigger than the 48,000, which actually found because we've recovered 11 million. So.
The National Audit Office said that poor financial management in the LSC was related to poor financial management by the Ministry of Justice itself. What engagement and support have you had from MOJ on this?
Well, as you know, I am a secondee from the MOJ.
Does that mean you ought to answer the question and somebody else
on both sides of no?
Declare an interest because
yes,
you're going back there. Yeah.
I don't know about that. Yes, no, I am a secondee from the MOJ, and my secondment was put in place precisely to provide support at a difficult time for the Legal Services Commission. Since that time, the Ministry have also seconded an interim finance director, and we've now recruited a permanent finance director who's the HMCS, or was the HMCS finance director. So the amount of support that has been put in by the Ministry, and every time I have asked for support over the course of the last 9 months, I have always been given support by the Ministry. So we are really driving all the improvements within the Legal Services Commission, commissioners and staff across the whole organisation. Really pleased that the Comptroller and Auditor General recognises that improvement in his report that he's laid today. And the Ministry is supporting that.
And the financial stewardship plan,
yeah.
Have you got an assessment of where you are in relation to that?
Yes, we're doing very well on the financial stewardship plan. So there's various elements of it. So there's the recommendations that came out of the PAC hearing last year, of which there were 26 in total. And we have implemented 22 of those, and the other 4 are well on their way to being implemented. The next bit of the financial stewardship plan is putting in controls in place to get, as I was talking about, working in partnership with providers to eradicate the errors before they're made. So that piece of work is being put in place and is actually very largely well received by individual providers when that is undertaken. So yes, we're doing well on our financial stewardship plan. A lot more to do.
That's admirable, and clearly the overpayment problem is a rather important one. But in reading the report and accounts, and I appreciate you are recently seconded to the job, that the words bonfire and taxpayers' money come to mind. I mean, it is extraordinary to me that your last chief executive was paid 40% more than the Prime Minister. It's interesting that you're paid 20% more than the Prime Minister today, and in fact the pension pot of the previous chief executive was £1.6 million, which is £24 for every person in my constituency. I see that you've achieved 3% reduction in your admin costs this year, but your ratio of admin cost to your legal aid budget is 5.4%, which I believe to be substantially higher than most of the quangos, in fact most of the departments in the public sector. What are you going to do to try and make these numbers look more reasonable when you become an executive agency as part of the MOJ? Because I think, frankly, this is an enormous financial bonfire burning out of control that needs to be reined in. And will you be leading that charge, or who will be taking responsibility for this programme going forward?
Well, at the moment, the Commission, which I chair, has got the statutory responsibility, and I'd like to pay tribute to Carolyn and her staff for the work they've done on the financial stewardship plan. Undoubtedly, the financial management had to be improved. It has been, and it's something which is a top priority. As you say, Mrs. Perry, the plan is for MOJ for us to become an executive agency, and then obviously the administration of LSC will be subsumed into the MOJ, but this is a top priority. I think it's also worth saying that there have been reductions in our administrative budget and reductions in staffing, and that itself has led to some problems in terms of the check-in that we need to do of individual law firms. So these are not easy issues. I think we recognise there has to be improvements in our financial management and improvements in our use of technology as well. And these are things we take very seriously.
And are you able to tell us then, Sybil, what the target is for when you become an executive agency? What will be the administrative cost or percentage when that event takes place?
I think we have a target which we've been given by the Ministry of Justice in line with the Ministry of Justice generally for our overhead reductions, which is about £25 million target over the CSR period. How much of that will arise purely from the move to executive agency status is probably more in the region of £8 million, and that will be from a reduction in duplication around corporate services largely, so bringing all those corporate services to be delivered through the Ministry of Justice.